All right, multiple sclerosis is arguably a neurodegenerative disorder, but it is demyelinating, so we're going to put it more in, categorize it in this group over here. So now we're going to start with the demyelinating disorder. So multiple sclerosis, by far the most important one to know. Osmotic demyelination, also known as central pontine myelinolysis. I think both of these names are good to know. They're a little bit telling. And I think I got really goofed up and I forgot to write the rest of them. Guillain-Barre is going to be one. Progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, Charcot-Marie tooth, Crab disease, adrenoleukodystrophy, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be a lot of them. We are destroying the myelin, and that's going to affect nerve conduction along the axon. Multiple sclerosis is the most important one to know. So demyelinating the central nervous system and the oligodendrocytes, the myelin there. So the relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis is the most common form. We can see that over here. It's a little bit like we said, if you imagine earlier we were going down, but now let's go up. If you're showing this dementia severity with the vascular dementia, we said it's going to go up. You have a little stroke, then it's here, and then it goes up and here. It's very similar to this, is that it just gets progressively worse in a step-by-step manner. Maybe the difference is it'll get worse, and it gets a little bit better, but it never goes back to the baseline. So you're always a little bit worse than you started off. And then you have another episode and it gets way worse and a little better, but never back to normal. And so again, you're going to have this progressive stepwise progression of the disease. There's other kinds, but this is the most common one. It's going to affect heavily myelinated areas, obviously more than other ones, which are things like, and that actually is to say for all of these diseases, but optic nerve is particularly myelinated. And so this can cause optic neuritis, so you might just have trouble seeing. And it's not binary, right? It's not like you can see or you can't see. There's a degree, it's a spectrum. So Marcus gun pupil, better known as the relative afferent pupillary defects, it really says a lot about it, right? So the R is underscored because it's really important here. If you shine the light into the right eye, the eye that has like a demyelination issue, and also this is only if this is typically if it's going to be one side more than the other side, but I suppose it could do both. But let's say I shine light in your right eye. Let's say your optic nerve is working 50%. Well, if you keep the light shining in that eye, it'll eventually constrict. It just might be a little bit slower than it would otherwise be. Okay, but let's say you now have it just in the left eye. Both pupils are constricting. We have direct and consensual pupillary response. And then I swing the flashlight over to the right eye. The right eye doesn't work as well as the left eye. And so your pupils actually might dilate for a second before the signal picks up and then it goes ahead and constricts again. So we can kind of see that here and here. Let's actually look at this one. So I think, all right, pupils constrict. Notice how the pupils got bigger. So this is the eye that's bad. The pupils got, if you shine it, it's going to constrict right there. But it's only when you swing the flashlight, you can see it. One more time, they constrict, and then it goes up a little bit, right? That's how you tell this. That's really, I think, important to know. The cerebellum and the brainstem, a lot of myelination there. This is just going to lead to ataxia. Other things, but especially ataxia. The medial longitudinal fasciculus, which is in the midline of the brainstem and the pons. This can lead to internuclear ophthalmoplegia, and that's a lot there. But remember, internuclear, it's between the nuclei, the abducens nuclei and the oculomotor nuclei via the MLF, which is going contralaterally. And so what you're going to have is a lateral gaze palsy. So the left frontal eye field will go to the right PPRF, which goes to the right abducens nerve, which abducts the right eye laterally. The left eye should look medially, but it can't because the MLF isn't working. Neurogenic bladder, so let's say you go to pee, signals are going to be sent between your bladder and your brain saying, hey, you can stop peeing, we've fully evacuated our bladder. But if you have MS, that communication's not quite there. So your brain doesn't know when you're done, like that you fully peed. So it says, okay, we're done peeing, but there's still some urine there. And so it's 45 minutes later, you have anything to drink, but then you got to go pee again. So someone's going to have to pee a lot, and probably not a lot's going to come out. Typically affects women in their 20s and 30s. And so I think I said this earlier, but that was funny. I was using my girlfriend's computer when I first found this picture. I Googled a young woman, has to pee, and this came up. And somehow she saw that on her Google search, and I think she gave me the benefit of the doubt, but it was just kind of an awkward thing to assure her that this was for a lecture. Uthoff sign. So if warm weather, just warm temperatures are going to slow nerve conduction. And well, we're affecting the myelin, which is trying to accelerate nerve conduction. So MF have slower conduction. If they take a hot bath, it's going to be even slower conduction. So whatever symptoms you have will be exacerbated in heat. And they actually used to use hot baths to diagnose MS. But they used to diagnose it that way, but it very well still might come up in a vignette. Lermit sign. So if you flex your neck, remember flexion is typically if you're going to make the angle here smaller. Flex your neck forwards, you have an electrical shock that kind of goes down your spine. To diagnose this, you have Lermit sign, you have Uthoff sign, or a young woman in the 20s and 30s with vision and bladder issues. Yes, but a little bit more quantitatively, we can do a lumbar puncture and look at the CSF. Do we see antibodies in the CSF? Do we see myelin that's been attacked and ripped off of the axon sheath? And then we might have periventricular plaques if we do an MRI of the brain. Osmotic has to do with salt. Demyelination is we're getting rid of the myelin. And then it's also known as central pontine myelinolysis, destruction of the myelin. So it's the central pontine area, which remember is supplied to the basilar artery and the in the pontine artery. So the central pons, and we should know all of the cranial nerves and whatnot there, etc. And so the osmotic aspect, this is if someone comes in, they're hyponatremic. We either raise their sodium, we get an intern or a med student, maybe a med student wouldn't be doing this. So a resident comes in, raises the sodium too high or too quickly, and for whatever reason, that damages this particular area, causes demyelination. And so this is, it's mimicking of it's the central pontine, it's the basilar area, so it's going to mimic locked-in syndrome because we have the corticospinal and corticobulbar. Remember, bulb is for the face, so you can't move your arms or legs, you can't move your face. You have something called locked-in syndrome. There's a horribly sad case about someone named Tony Nicholson in the UK who was just this successful business person, played rugby, and then he just had a really, I think he actually had a basilar stroke. But again, it's the same presentation. For 7 years, he tried to find some sort of meaning in life as someone with locked-in syndrome, and it was just so miserable that he wanted to end his life. But being paralyzed, he couldn't do it without assistance, and it was illegal in the UK. And there was this big legal battle, and he lost. And he was so distraught. This is just the saddest picture to me. I mean, to me it's amazing. He can't really control his face, and yet somehow it still gets through just this immense, overwhelming. Depiction of sadness, right? It somehow still gets through in ways that I don't really understand, and he just refused food for a week and he died. It's awful. Guillain-Barré syndrome. This is going to be molecular mimicry. So look for a patient who they're like, I had an infection 3 weeks ago, and now I'm having trouble feeling my toes or something, or having trouble breathing. So you get an infection. Often it could be virus, could be bacteria. Often it's going to be Campylobacter jejuni. Peripheral nerve demyelination. Notice that the peripheral nerves actually include cranial nerves 3 to 12. It's going to be asymmetrical, so it's important that it's symmetrical ascending paralysis. So you're going to have diminished deep tendon reflexes. So again, this is things like Achilles, Babinski, patellar reflex. And ultimately, the concern is that it might get to the diaphragm and limit breathing. So a respiratory workup initially is needed, and you might need respiratory support. Most people, though, eventually it'll go away. You'll recover, 80% of people, but 20% of people are going to have long-term symptoms, varying degrees. Acute disseminated post-encephalomyelitis, also known as post-infection. So after an infection or vaccination, the vaccination is more rare. Some people can get acute MS symptoms. Now, this does affect kids, which is how, MS is going to be women in their 20s and 30s often. It could be men, but more often than not, it's going to be women in their 20s and 30s. This is going to be kids. It's a one-off thing, right? MS is progressive. But this is just, you get one big episode of demyelination. And you can see that here. I mean, look at all of these little demyelination and all over the brain. And it's acute. It's one time, but it's very severe, and 10% of people die. And I'm sure the people who don't die, they're going to have long-standing effects. Progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy is an AIDS-defining illness. So the JC virus gets reactivated, and it destroys oligodendrocytes. So it's going to have a lot of MS-esque symptoms. It's rapidly progressive and fatal. Charcot-Marie-Tooth. So this is a genetic disorder where people have a defect in CMT1 or CMT2. CMT1 is a myelin protein. CMT2 is an axon. Either way, we're going to affect the peripheral nerves in the upper and lower extremities, a little bit more in the lower extremities. So this is going to be motor and sensory. And it's just progressive. It just, as someone gets older and older, the symptoms will become clearer and clearer. And they're like Friedreich ataxia, they're going to have this pes cavus, this high arch. Krabbe disease, metachromatic leukodystrophy, adrenal leukodystrophy, you might recall these from biochem. These are going to be storage disorders or really destruction disorders. So a lysosomal storage disorder is we send something to lysosome, we want it to be broken down, but if we're missing a particular enzyme, we can't break down these sphingolipids. So Krabbe and metachromatic are both going to be here. Sphingolipids and cerebrosides will accumulate. And you're going to get all sorts of CNS and a little bit of PNS issues. In the peroxisome, we do a little bit of beta oxidation for very long chain fatty acids. Normally do mitochondria, but very long as in the peroxisome. And this is adrenoleukodystrophy. This does affect the central nervous system, but the adreno aspect tells me that the adrenal crisis, the adrenal glands are going to be particularly affected. And that's actually the larger issue here, is that the adrenal glands are not working or they're working too much, or in any case, epinephrine or norepinephrine is getting spilled in the blood. And you can hypertensive crisis.